Tolkien was the kind of author who intentionally left certain mysteries unresolved in his work. In his view, a fantasy universe that leaves no room for interpretation or imagination is not a very good fantasy world at all. In 2 different letters, the professor makes this point very clear. Let's look first at what he says in letter 247. I am doubtful myself about the undertaking. Part of the attraction of The Lord of the Rings is, I think, due to the glimpses of a large history in the background. An attraction like that of viewing far off an unvisited island, or seeing the towers of a distant city gleaming in a sunlit mist. To go there is to destroy the magic. And in letter 144, when asked directly about Tom Bombadil, Tolkien is even more explicit, quoting, "Even in a mythical age there must be some enigmas, as there always are. Tom Bombadil is one. Intentionally." With this context established, in this video we're going to examine 5 mysteries in Tolkien's legendarium that were never fully resolved. Grond, the Hammer of the Underworld. Morgoth, the Master of Sauron, possessed 2 immensely valuable items, his crown and a hammer. The fallen Vala wielded this terrifying weapon, from which fire and molten rock burst forth, to kill many foes. Among them, perhaps the most notable was Fingolfin, High King of the Noldor, who, in my opinion, is the most skilled elf in physical combat in all of Tolkien's legendarium. The Silmarillion describes the moment as follows. Then Morgoth hurled aloft Grond, the Hammer of the Underworld, and swung it down like a bolt of thunder. But Fingolfin sprang aside and Grond rent a mighty pit in the earth, whence smoke and fire darted. But when Morgoth was finally defeated, at the end of the First Age, we know exactly what happened to his crown. It was beaten into a collar and used to drag him back to the Undying Lands in the most humiliating way imaginable. But his weapon? We have no idea what became of it. And before anyone thinks, oh, well, maybe Tolkien just forgot about it. No, that's not the case, and I can show you. Tolkien mentions this weapon by name in The Return of the King. You know that massive battering ram shaped like a wolf's head that we see smashing through the gates of Minas Tirith in the films? That ram is also called Grond. The movies never explain this, but in the books that battering ram, just like Morgoth's hammer, is enchanted. Tolkien explicitly says it was laid with spells of destruction. From The Return of the King, quote, "Great engines crawled across the field, and in the midst was a huge ram, great as a forest tree, 100 feet in length, swinging on mighty chains. Long had it been forging in the dark smithies of Mordor, and its hideous head, founded of black steel, was shaped in the likeness of a ravening wolf. On it, spells of ruin lay. Grond they named it, in memory of the hammer of the underworld of old." In other words, Tolkien absolutely remembered Morgoth's hammer. So the real question is this: could Sauron, or perhaps a Balrog, wield the weapon of a Vala if they were to find it? This is one of those mysteries I can't help but imagine. What would happen if an orc stumbled upon Grond? Would it be instantly disintegrated the moment it touched the weapon? Or would it instead receive an enormous surge of power? Something almost like Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, which grants its power to the worthy. 2. Tom Bombadil. Tom Bombadil has been debated by Tolkien scholars and fans for decades. As we saw in the introduction, Tolkien deliberately stated that Bombadil is an intentional mystery within his world. What interests us here, though, is what makes him so enigmatic. And I'll say up front, there are many reasons. Tom Bombadil is the only known inhabitant of Middle-earth who is completely immune to the effects of Sauron's One Ring. When he meets Frodo, he casually asks to borrow the ring, places it on his finger, and nothing happens. No corruption, no invisibility. He simply hands it back without hesitation. Even more striking, when Frodo puts on the ring and becomes invisible to everyone else, Bombadil can still see him perfectly clearly, and immediately tells him to take it off. And this indifference to the ring is only one example of Bombadil's uniqueness. He can banish Barrow-wights with his bare hands. He claims to have been in Middle-earth even before the first Dark Lord ever entered the world. If we focused entirely on Bombadil, this video would turn into a video about him alone. The point is that we don't know what he truly is. An original spirit? A deliberate authorial insertion? A dissonance in the music of creation itself? Once again, Tolkien explicitly refused to explain. So for now, we'll leave Bombadil here. In another video, we can explore this enigmatic being in much greater depth. 3. The Blue Wizards. For those who may not know, there weren't just 3 wizards, as shown in the films, Gandalf, Saruman, and Radagast, but 5. The 2 blue wizards are only briefly referenced by Gandalf in the Hobbit film trilogy. Their fate is one of the most controversial topics in Tolkien's legendarium. This is largely because Tolkien worked on his world for decades. Over time, he expanded certain ideas, revised others, and sometimes completely abandoned earlier concepts. Few characters were affected by these changes as much as the 2 blue wizards, Alatar and Palando. In Unfinished Tales, Tolkien states quite clearly that of the 5 wizards, only one remained truly faithful, the last to arrive, meaning Gandalf. In letter 211, he writes the following about the blue wizards. I fear that they failed, as Saruman did, though doubtless in different ways. I suspect they were founders or beginners of secret cults and magical traditions that outlasted the fall of Sauron. However, later in his life, as recorded in the history of Middle-earth, Tolkien reconsidered this idea. He suggested that the blue wizards were actually crucial in resisting Sauron in the Far East, to the point that he even gave them new names, Morinitar and Romastamo, and stated that without them, Sauron would have gathered enough strength to overwhelm the West. This raises several questions. Were the blue wizards faithful until the very end, or only for a time? If they did fall, how long did they resist? And what exactly did they accomplish in the East? Their fate is yet another example of the complexity of Tolkien's world and of his creative process. 4. Dagor Dagorath, the apocalypse of Tolkien's world. At the end of the First Age, Morgoth was defeated, his feet were cut off, and he was cast beyond the walls of the world, into the timeless void. Yet, in the history of Middle-earth, it becomes clear that Tolkien once intended to bring Morgoth back. Quoting, "There is also a prophecy concerning the ultimate battle, when the world is old and the gods weary, and Morgoth will come back through the door of night. For 'tis said that ere the great end come, Melko shall in some wise contrive a quarrel between moon and sun. And when they are gone, the gates of both east and west will be destroyed." For context, the sun and moon are guarded by 2 primordial spirits named Aryan and Tilion. Aryan in particular is described as a spirit of fire of immense power. So the great mystery here is simple. How? At the end of the First Age, Morgoth could only be defeated because he had poured most of his power into the world and was greatly weakened. On top of that, his feet were severed before he was cast into the void. How did Morgoth go from a crippled outcast to a credible threat to the Valar? One popular theory is that ancient beings and old gods dwell in the void, entities similar to Ungoliant, almost Lovecraftian in nature, and that they may have aided in Morgoth's recovery. But again, this is only speculation. Tolkien never tells us how Morgoth, weakened and mutilated, could regain enough power to threaten the Valar once more. 5. The fate of Shelob. Anyone who has only seen the films might assume Shelob was killed by Sam. After all, once she is wounded, she retreats into her lair and is never mentioned again. In the books, however, Tolkien is much more explicit. He tells us outright that she did not die from her wounds. On the contrary, she recovered and returned to ambushing unwary travelers. What we don't know is her fate in the Fourth Age, after the fall of Sauron, or how long she continued to be a threat to the peoples of Middle-earth. And if you, my fellow reader, believe you know the answer to any of these mysteries, don't hesitate to share your thoughts with us in the comments below. That would be most appreciated. If you like this kind of video, consider subscribing and leaving a like for more. It really helps small channels like this. Take care and see you in the next one.